Some of the most important discoveries in American history weren't made by experts with advanced degrees, cutting-edge technology, or multi-million-dollar budgets. They were made by someone paying close attention to something everyone else had already walked past. Ethan Parker was 10 years old, and he had a box of crayons. Every morning before school, Ethan moved through the rows of his grandfather Walter's apple orchard the way most kids his age moved through video game worlds, methodically, curiously, cataloging every detail. He tracked where the deer crossed at dusk. He memorized which creeks ran dry by August and which never did. He noticed the way certain rocks appeared in lines that didn't feel accidental and how old trails, barely visible beneath decades of grass, seemed to connect points across the landscape in ways that made a quiet kind of sense. To everyone else driving past on the county road, it was just a family farm. To Ethan, it was a living map waiting to be drawn. Walter had always encouraged that curiosity. The older man had spent a lifetime on this land and carried its history in his memory the way farmers do. Not in documents or databases, but in the rhythm of seasons and the weight of soil. He told Ethan stories passed down through generations. Names of old roads, the paths traders once used, the boundaries that existed long before surveyors with GPS showed up to redraw everything. Ethan absorbed all of it, then walked the orchard and tried to find it. Over months, he filled a notebook with sketches, trails, ridgelines, creeks, stone formations, boundary markers. Then one weekend, he spread it all out across the kitchen table in the form of a single large crayon map, colorful, hand-lettered, covered in the child's careful observations about a landscape that had been there for centuries. He didn't know yet that the map would eventually stop a $500 million development in its tracks. While Ethan explored his grandfather's orchard, something massive was quietly reshaping the world around it. A major financial institution had been assembling land across the region for months, purchasing farm after farm, parcel after parcel, until more than 7,500 acres had changed hands. The plan was ambitious, a large-scale development project that would transform miles of countryside into something new. Surveying crews worked constantly. Digital mapping systems processed thousands of data points. Professional consultants produced report after report. The Parker Orchard became the last privately owned property sitting in the middle of the newly assembled land. Executives sent representatives with generous offers. Walter thanked them, offered coffee, and declined every time. This was his family's land. Decades of history lived here. No number on a check was going to change that. The developers moved forward with their planning regardless. Their reports were thorough, their technology was sophisticated, and their teams were experienced. They saw no reason to pause. They had not yet seen the crayon map. It was Walter who first noticed that Ethan's drawing wasn't just a child's art project. One evening, comparing the map to a stack of old family documents pulled from the attic, he spotted it. Several of Ethan's hand-drawn landmarks matched locations referenced in notes written generations earlier. The language in those old records was vague, written in a time when people navigated by physical features rather than coordinates. But the patterns were there, and they pointed to the same places Ethan had marked in green and brown crayon. They took it further. At the county archives, historians pulled historical survey records and overlaid them against Ethan's observations. The matches kept appearing. Features that had disappeared from public memory. Stone markers, old trail intersections, ridge formations were all still present on a 10-year-old hand-drawn map. A local land consultant reviewed everything. He came in skeptical and left shaken. What Ethan had documented, without realizing it, was a connected network of landmarks stretching across thousands of acres, a network that professional surveys had completely missed. The crayon map found its way into a project meeting. Most executives dismissed it immediately. Compared to their digital systems and satellite imagery, a child's drawing seemed almost insulting to take seriously. One reportedly laughed. The historians in the room did not laugh. Deeper investigation confirmed what the archivist had suspected. The landmarks Ethan mapped weren't random. They were the remnants of a forgotten transportation and trade corridor, a historic route that had once connected multiple communities across the region, used for generations before modern roads erased it from practical memory. Layers of development, changing ownership, and infrastructure projects had buried its significance so thoroughly that it had simply ceased to exist in the public record. Until a boy with a notebook started paying attention. Specialists arrived. Researchers cross-referenced historical maps, aerial imagery, and archived records against Ethan's original drawing. The corridor was real, it was significant, and its center point ran directly to the land developers had spent months acquiring. Land they now could not simply pave over without addressing a discovery that had attracted attention from historians, preservation advocates, and local officials. The revelation changed everything. The orchard, once viewed as a minor holdout in an otherwise clean land assembly, suddenly sat at the geographic and historical heart of something important. Researchers credited Ethan's observations publicly and directly, noting that his careful, consistent attention to the landscape had surface information that sophisticated databases and professional survey teams had entirely overlooked. Planners went back to the drawing board. The development moved forward, but with a fundamentally altered approach, one that acknowledged the corridor's existence and worked to preserve rather than erase its significance. The history won, because a child had cared enough to look closely. The orchard is still there. Walter still tends it. Ethan, older now, still walks the rows in the early morning, still notices things most people don't. On one quiet afternoon after the story had settled into local legend, the two of them planted a new apple tree near the old boundary line, pressing soil around its roots without saying much. Some things don't need words. The Crayon map hangs framed inside the farmhouse. Visitors stop and study it, running their eyes across the hand-drawn trails and careful markings, amazed that something made with a box of Crayolas had outlasted every professional report filed against it. For Ethan, it's a reminder of something his grandfather taught him long before any of this happened. The most valuable thing you can bring to any situation isn't equipment or credentials. It's the willingness to actually look. In an era where data is infinite and attention is scarce, a 10-year-old boy with a crayon taught a room full of executives something they hadn't budgeted for in any of their projections. Pay attention. The landscape remembers everything. Most people just stop asking it questions.